Good morning and afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar series from the Cybersecurity Collaborative, where today we'll be talking about integrating compliance across your organization. We're going to wait just a few minutes. We'll probably wait 2 minutes to give more people time to join, and then we will get started. For anyone who joined, we're just going to wait a few more minutes, and then we'll get started probably around 10:02, 10:03. One more minute. Okay, I think we've got enough time for everyone to join. So first of all, I want to welcome everyone to the new installment in the series that we do. Today, we're going to be talking about integrating compliance into your organization. I wanted to introduce the collaborative. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a very unique organization. Its mission is to allow CISOs to have a safe place where they can come together with their peers. They can communicate, enable, do knowledge sharing with each other, and really share best practices and help each other build and accelerate their programs so that they can defend their digital assets and the companies that they've been retained to support. And so to introduce myself, my name is Stephen Young. I am the Vice President of Webinars, SWAT teams, and content. I am the former CISO for Kellogg's in Blue Shield of California. And we are very fortunate today to have Sean Tuma with us. So Sean is going to be discussing integrating compliance across your organization, focused on incident response. Sean is an internationally recognized cybersecurity fraud and data privacy law expert. He's practiced for over 2 decades. He co-chairs the Spencer Fenn LLP Data Privacy and Cybersecurity Practice, where he regularly serves as outside security and privacy counsel to a wide range of companies. In 2016, Sean was selected by the National Law Journal as one of the top 50 cybersecurity privacy law trailblazers worldwide. And the same year, he was also named as Texas Super Lawyers, as being one of the top 100 lawyers in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He is also a practitioner and editor in Bloomberg's Law's Texas Privacy and Data Security Law. He's on the advisory board for Northwestern State University, the University of North Texas Cyber Forensics Lab, Los Angeles City College, and Los Angeles Trade Check. He's also the chair of the Computer Technology section for the State Bar of Texas. So we have conducted many webinars on incident response that have been very well received, for preparing your organization to successfully handle an event. But today we're very fortunate because Sean is going to take that a step further, and he is going to share the steps that your security program can take before and during and even after a cybersecurity attack to be prepared to stand up for the scrutiny that occurs after an event. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sean.
Stephen, thank you very much. Thank you all for having me here today to speak with you on this important topic. And thank you for the very kind introduction. I appreciate that. As Stephen mentioned, I am an attorney, and so first and foremost, don't hold that against me. I generally don't like lawyers either, which is why I spend so much of my time in the cyber realm dealing with folks that are not lawyers. Having said that, I have practiced in this area of cyber law since 1999. Got into this prior to Y2K and have been trying to figure out what I'm doing every day since then as the legal landscape has changed daily almost, as the cyber landscape, the cyber threat, the technology environment, and the nature of the battle that we're in. We're in a war. And as that changes, I find I have to continually adapt and continually learn. And so the most important thing I think I know about cyber risk and cyber law is that there's so much that I don't know, that none of us know, that none of us can know. And if someone purports to have all the answers, I would really be concerned about how much they truly understand the unpredictable nature of what we all are dealing with on a daily basis. And, you know, it's my practice has evolved quite a bit over the years. And as I sit here today, and probably for the last 6 or 7 years, the vast majority of what I do on a daily basis, it involves incident response. There's kind of 3 buckets to my practice. One is cyber risk management. So that's being proactive on the front end, trying to help companies understand their cyber risk and how to better manage that. And that involves working with a lot of experts, because I'm a lawyer. I'm not the technical expert and don't purport to be. The second bucket would be working on compliance preparations, and that goes hand in hand with the cyber risk management, because you're understanding your risk and then you're working towards mitigating that risk. But then the third bucket is the incident response. And for my team within our firm, and we have a full cyber practice, cyber privacy technology practice, but my particular team is focused primarily on incident response. And so day in and day out, that's what we deal with, and that's what I deal with. And, you know, the first question that people always ask me, so I serve as what can be called a breach coach or breach first responder, or a breach or privacy counsel. There's any number of names for what I do. But what it typically involves is I get the first call, and then I help lead the response. And people always ask, Sean, you're a lawyer. What does that have to do with responding to an incident? Why a lawyer? And the simple answer that a lot of lawyers who are not terribly experienced in this area provide is they say, oh, well, we're here for the attorney-client privilege. You hire a lawyer and then put our name on everything, and it makes it all privileged. And look, privilege is a great reason to be here, and it's helpful, but you can't rely on it, and it's certainly not absolute. Our primary value is not the attorney-client privilege. Our primary value is the experience we have with leading hundreds, if not more, incident responses and walking companies through the process and helping them with that leadership aspect. But more importantly, Um, Incident response has the technical aspect. It obviously, your first priority is to investigate and determine what happened, secure your environment, and then get your operations back up and running if you're dealing with something like a ransomware or something like that, which we deal with a lot of. But aside from the technical aspect, the other aspect of it is, in today's environment, there are tons of legal and regulatory requirements out there that involve data, that involve how you handle that data, how you protect that data, and what you must do when there is an incident involving that data. And right now, you're probably all sitting here thinking, yeah, I'm thinking about the GDPR. I'm thinking about California consumer privacy, which is hitting everyone right now. But there's one big, huge area of law that people fail to think about a lot of times. And it's more law than we can ever see through statutory laws and regulations. It's your contracts. It's your agreements that you have with your business partners that spell out how you must handle data, how you must protect it, what access you're giving, who you're giving that access to, and then who's responsible if there is an incident for the ultimate liability. Is there indemnification obligations, things like that, and who has to lead the process of dealing with an incident whenever it happens. Contracts spell all this stuff out now, and that is the law amongst the parties. The problem is most companies don't know what their contracts say. They haven't thought about this issue. Or you may have the CFO or someone like that dealing with it from a contract standpoint, yet your CISO and your technical team has no idea what those obligations are. And so they're not speaking to each other internally. And so when we're talking about compliance, we're talking about certainly compliance with, GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, SEC requirements, whatnot. But we're also talking about compliance with contractual obligations as well, because the liability coming from those can be substantial as well. So when people ask, why is a lawyer involved in this process? That's a very big reason for why, because as a lawyer, someone needs to guide you through the process of making sure you're responding in an appropriate manner and that your team is working properly, right? But you've got to also have someone guiding that process to make sure you're not making mistakes in your incident response that are going to cause major problems when you have to deal with those regulatory agencies, whether it's international, state, local, whatnot, or when you have to deal with the other parties, business partners along the way. And so really, when Stephen and I were talking about this, what we thought about sharing here is more how you go about preparing for this, and what the role of legal is and compliance is, because what we find in our experience is once we do go through that notification process and have to report these events to the regulators are then coming in, and they're not just looking at the event itself. They're then looking backwards at your entire compliance history and your compliance program and your diligence and your documentation and your efforts. And that's oftentimes what they're penalizing companies for, is that they haven't done a good job with the compliance program. They're not penalizing them as a strict liability standpoint just because they had a ransomware event or they had some other data breach or something of that nature. So, Stephen, how's that for at least laying out the general ideas here?
No, I think that's a great job. If we can go ahead and start walking through, if you can share your experiences on the things that organizations have done well, how you've helped them prepare, and the critical things that our members can really take away from this webinar to help advance their program, that would be great.
Yeah. Okay. So my perspective here, number one, is cyber is, and we know this. Everybody on this call knows this. Cyber is not just an IT risk. It's not just an IT issue. It's an overall business risk issue that impacts every aspect of the company. And I say that because, you know, I believe cyber's the biggest risk companies face today in our environment. And I know that's a very large, grand statement to make in the world of COVID, right? Because we're all struggling with how to adapt to the changes that have come about because of COVID. But, you know, even with what we saw in early or late February, early March, with all of the COVID problems that were coming about, we saw it take days, weeks, and even months in some cases for that to impact the business, for businesses to truly feel the effect. But, you know, you look at the headlines of today, and ransomware is the biggest thing in cyber in the news in many cases, other than maybe TikTok right now. But, you know, as I'm sitting here today, we have probably 10 active ransomware cases that we are handling and managing in our office, just in our practice group. And I think a ransomware case is much more severe on a business than even what we've seen through all this COVID problem that's caused such disruption. Because when you think about it, it's devastating, and it's almost immediate that the impacts are felt. You literally have a CEO laying her or his head down on their pillow the night before saying, wow, the business is looking good, operations are moving forward, production's moving forward, money's coming in, things are going well. And they wake up the next morning, learn of an attack, and learn that every single aspect of that business has been shut down. There is nothing operating. There is no work being done, no communications, no nothing. And unless they have adequate backups or an opportunity to deal with potential decryption and negotiation and payment of the ransom, and ensuring they're not paying foreign adversaries who are on the State Department's list of folks not to pay, unless you can do all of those things, you're facing bankruptcy. I mean, it's over, because without a computer system, without your IT network, there is literally nothing most businesses today can do. And you know, you only have to think back about Arizona Iced Tea several months ago or a year or so ago, when they got hit with the ransomware and they were having to take orders with a pad and pencil and try to run their business that way. And nobody in today's world can do that. So the devastating impact is there. And it's not just in the IT department, it's in every aspect of the organization. So to start preparing for how to handle this, we've got to, number one, have buy-in from every aspect of the organization. And they need to have a seat at the table as part of that incident response team. And so, you know, it starts with educating the people within the organization, which starts with communications, having the conversations that need to be had to say, yeah, I'm the CISO and this is my primary concern, but you're the CFO. This is a big concern to you too, because if accounting shuts down and money's not coming in and bills aren't going out, you're going to feel that. Our whole organization's going to feel that. Or it's marketing to say, you know, what good's marketing products if we can't fulfill the orders, or operations or whatnot. So it starts with conversations within the organization, talking about these risks in an everyday sense and not in some sense of highly technical jargon and things of that nature. And so from there, you know, you really have to you have to start putting together your incident response team with the key stakeholders. And when you're doing that, and this is not just a self-serving statement, you've got to have your legal involved, whether it's your internal legal, if you have in-house counsel with the capacity and the manpower to focus on cyber and privacy and understanding the risk environment. Or if you can't, you need to get outside legal counsel to help you with that as part of your incident response planning. Because obviously the CISOs know, number one objective in your incident response planning is securing, protecting your organization and getting back up and running if needed. But the other phase of that needs to run concurrently is ensuring you're complying with the laws and regulations while you do it. And so the only way you can ensure you're complying with the laws and regulations is, number one, you got to know what they are. You got to know what data you have. You got to know where that data is. You got to know who that data impacts, who are the data subjects. You got to know where they reside, because what a lot of people don't realize is when we're talking about the privacy-based breach notification laws, just in the US, the law of the jurisdiction that applies is the law, is the jurisdiction where the individual who's the subject of the data, right? So if you have data for me, Sean Tuma, in your environment, and it's sensitive personal information, I live in Texas. That's my state of residence. So the breach notification laws for the state of Texas are the laws that apply to my data. Now, Stephen's on the West Coast. The state where Stephen lives is the law that's going to apply to his. And so we have 50 states with 50 different breach notification laws. You got to know, do you have data for people in every state within the US? Do you have data for people in the EU? Do you have data for people in Taiwan or Mexico or wherever else? Because they all have different requirements. Sometimes they have different notification standards. Sometimes they have different standards for what is a breach. Okay, not every event, for sure, not every incident is a data breach. You may have an incident that is considered a data breach in one jurisdiction that requires notification, but is just an incident that requires nothing legally in another jurisdiction. And so you've got to know those things. That requires mapping out your data, knowing where it is, knowing the jurisdictions. At the same time, someone has to be in control of and have a handle on what your contractual obligations are. For example, if you're a provider who is hosting data for other parties or processing data for other parties, and then you have an incident that impacts that data that truly belongs to other companies, and they're responsible for it. Well, you're responsible for it also because you're the one in possession and custody of it. But if you have one contract that everybody uses that says, if we have an incident that is a potential data breach of your data, and we will notify you within 24 hours of determining that there is a risk of data breach. That's one thing. But what if you're signing different contracts with every different party that comes along that has all these different standards in it? You don't know that. Somebody's got to know that, because in doing your incident response, you've got to comply with all of those legal obligations. And unless someone has kept a handle on your contracts, is familiar with what you're agreeing to and committing yourself to, that's a very fruitful area for a lot of problems as you move forward in an incident response process. And so, all of this needs to be done before there's ever an incident. Because once it happens, if you're dealing with 12-hour notification standards or 24 hours or, GDPR 72 hours, things like that, you don't then have time to go back and sit down and try to get a handle on what all this involves. So as you're thinking about your incident response planning, you've really got to think about how you're going to comply with all these laws and regulations out there, which means you've got to know your data. You got to know what data you have, where it is, who it pertains to, what jurisdictions are involved, and how you're going to comply with that. So,
Sean, if I could just drill down on that a second. So agree 100%, you have to have that in place before the incident occurs, because in the heat of the battle, there isn't time to do that. So do you work with obviously you work with your legal team, do you work with purchasing, accounts payable? Where do you go to get that data? And really, how often do you update that? What advice do you give your clients in that space?
The answer is everybody, Stephen. You work with, and it's a case-by-case basis. And that's why the relationship is so important, because coming in cold, I don't know what questions to ask. I don't know what kind of data many times the organization's even dealing in or collecting, or about its operations or its extended operations. And so all of this starts with getting to know the people I'm working with as an attorney, getting to know their organization, getting to know their business, and getting an understanding of how that flows. So if you're primarily a marketing company, then I'm guessing you're going to have a lot of customer list databases and things like that may not have a big impact in a lot of U.S. jurisdictions, but have huge impacts in maybe California and the EU. If you're a healthcare company, I know enough to know you're going to have a lot of protected health information, and HIPAA compliance is going to be a huge issue. So we're going to look at your patient databases and where that is and how that's being protected and things of that nature. If you're manufacturing, I'm guessing you might not have a lot of consumer data. So maybe we don't need to spend as much time focusing on our consumer data as we need to focusing on our business contracts. And it's really it's a case-by-case analysis, and it starts with a partnership of getting to know each other and having the conversations to say, tell me about where you do business. Tell me about your business. Tell me about your business partners. And then you just start whiteboarding that out or mapping that out. And that's how you learn what the next questions to ask. And, Stephen, I mean, you're a CISO. You understand the role of risk assessment. What we're really talking about here is just like you go through a technical risk assessment, you're going through a legal and a compliance risk assessment. And it all is integrated and ties in together, because your technical risk, your data liability, and all of that is determined by your operations, your technology, your storage. I mean, are you using a managed services provider that's handling most of the technical work for your organization? I got to tell you, I've been a huge fan of managed services providers for small to mid-sized companies for many years, because I felt like they could do a better job of running and protecting networks than, maybe just a overworked, overstressed solo IT guy in a lot of these companies. But lately, we've been handling a lot of ransomware cases where the managed services providers were the ones that got hit, and either the data was corrupted in their environment, or their tools were used to then go and corrupt the data of the clients. And that's a problem. And the bigger problem then is when the managed services providers are not responsive and either don't have the ability to respond or take this lackadaisical attitude that I'm dealing with right now today. As you know, before this webinar, been on the phone trying to get resolved, where they're just not doing what they need to do to respond and get the clients back up and running. And so when you think about the risk that comes about there, I mean, man, you're putting your whole life as a business in the hands of a third party. You better make sure you got a really good relationship with them. You really trust them and that they're very responsive to your needs. And another very important issue here that I need to get out, even though it's a little bit outside the scope, but it's that of cyber insurance. Because from a company standpoint, where we see many incident responses go wrong is they simply don't have the manpower, they don't have the resources needed to bring in the experts to do forensics, to do security within the environment at a very high level, to negotiate and pay some of these ransoms that are in 7 figures or more. And so then when you think about a party like a managed services provider, you know, you better make sure if you're using a managed services provider, they have adequate cyber insurance, because you're not going to get much out of that policy, but you need them to be able to recover themselves and get back up and running, because your life is now in their hands. And so there's a lot that can be drilled down into on the cyber insurance area. We can talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can delve into that because it's a topic that comes up a lot. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but to play that back, it sounds as for your incident response plan, as you're doing your tabletop exercise, understanding the requirements of your cyber insurance and having that integrated into your IR plan, and understanding, you know, those areas that you can take care of, and then obviously the gaps and mitigating them before the event occurs. Is that what I'm really taking away? Is really understanding that and getting that baked into the IR plan?
Absolutely. And you know, I'm going to talk a little bit about IR planning, and then then jump into that cyber insurance issue, because it really is critical, and I'll explain why. You know, I've been asked many times the question of how long should an incident response plan be? And my response is a very lawyerly answer. It depends. That's it. It depends. It needs to be long enough to be effective, yet short enough to be effective. And, you know, I know people that make a living doing nothing but putting together incident response plans that fill many binders, and they're tabbed and indexed, and they look beautiful, and they're impressive to see. In the hundreds of incidents that I've managed, I cannot think of one time where I've ever needed something like that. Now, look, I get that there may be some companies, some organizations that require that. And when they do, and you do what's appropriate. But what I find is where the ball gets dropped most often in an incident response is a lack of having key players who know their role and know where they're involved, and a lack of ability to communicate quickly and effectively with the people you need to have involved to get them to doing their jobs of what they do best. So what we see is communications are the most important part of an incident response. And communications means you have a great team in place, you know who they are, you know how to reach them. And I mean, look, in the ransomware cases we're seeing, a lot of times all this stuff stored on the network, and the CISO can't even get in touch with either their managed services provider, or they can't get in touch with the security firm they've worked with because they don't have their number. It's stored in their email. And so the best practical advice I can give everybody is take your cell phone and have a small group of the key people of your incident response team by text message, where you can send one message to say, we've got a problem, need to jump on a call in 10 minutes. You know, because time is of the essence in an incident response. And so what we're seeing happen is if I have one page of key players with their roles and communications protocol with redundancy on how to reach them, that to me means more than all the binders of detailed what to do in 14 different contingencies can ever mean. Now, granted, I'm not handling a NASA type level incident. Okay. If I were, I may need that. But I'm not. And so you know what your organization needs, and your incident response plan needs to be appropriate for your organization. And you may need to have one that you show to the board and that gets put on the shelf that looks really impressive. And you may just need a summary of that for what you're really going to use when the bad stuff hits the fan. Because I don't know many people that have time to go flipping through binders and doing all that when that happens.
So I apologize. If we circle back, I really like the advice of having your key contacts in a text form, especially in the case of ransomware, since that's becoming, obviously the attack of choice. How do you handle the contractual requirements that you were talking about? Where do you capture those? So if you're in the middle of a ransomware attack, you can still figure out who you need to contact and when, those timelines of 24 hours, 72 hours. Where do you capture those? Do you keep those in a hard copy or on a separate device that's not connected to the network?
That's a huge problem. And the reality is, many of times you're not going to be in compliance with those obligations because you're not going to have that ability. In an ideal world, what you would do is you would say, we control the contracting process. These are our standard terms that we're going to use, and we are not going to agree to any other terms. Our standard terms are 24 hours if it's a substantial incident that appears to be or reasonably could be a data breach or threaten to your proprietary information or your trade secrets or what have you. So in an ideal world, you would control that terminology and that obligation yourself, unless you're a major corporation that has a lot of bargaining power. That's probably not going to happen. So the next step.
Sorry, go ahead.
The next step would be have a spreadsheet where you have your key contractual relationships and simply, list out this business partner. Here's what our agreement says. Here's our contact information in each column. That's a manual way of going about that. It's time consuming, but if you're truly going to be prepared, that's going to be in your incident response plan. So that's part of your communications protocol on the team you need, but then also who you have to notify if something bad happens and you've got to start notifying business partners. There are companies out there that specialize in contract management that do this type of work of aggregating all of these contractual provisions and making them simple and usable. So there are those type of solutions for really big, complex organizations. But, it's time consuming, really. And the more key business partners you have with different contractual language, the more you've got to have a handle on that. But that is something that needs to be part of your incident response plan as you go through that.
So that means you need to partner with purchasing and with legal so that you can update that document, keep it current within some reasonability. Obviously, it's not going to be every day. But
Absolutely.
gotcha.
And
I
in
like that.
legal, in my view, legal needs to be a key partner in your entire incident response planning process. They need to be hand in hand with the CISO. And if they're not, they don't understand their role in this process.
So circling back to the cyber insurance, what are some of the big gotchas that you have seen when you've worked with those?
Okay,
Some of
so great segue, Stephen. Thank you. It is as though we have planned all of this out, right? So, so I want everybody here to just stop and think about something for a second. So it's Friday afternoon. It's 4 o'clock, and you find out about the ransom that your company's just been hit with a ransomware attack, and you're going, "Holy smokes! What do we do?" Hopefully, you've already got your incident response plan. You've already got your team in place. But I mentioned communications with your team as being most important here. First, that means you got to have a team, right? They've got to know their roles. They've got to be prepared for this game or this battle. So you say, hey, I just heard this webinar with this big mouth lawyer named Sean who told me all this stuff about legal. I'm going to call him and see what he thinks. And so you call me, you're a new client, I haven't worked with you before, and you say, Sean, we got hit with a ransomware attack. What do we do? And my first question to you is going to be this: do you have cyber insurance? And you're going to be taken aback by that, because you're going to say, why, yes, we have cyber insurance, or I think we have cyber insurance, or I don't know if we have cyber insurance. But what the hell does that have to do with anything right now? It's 4 o'clock on a Friday. We need to be getting to work responding to this incident. And then I'm going to tell you, Stephen, that's great, but I need to know if you have cyber insurance before we can move forward. And then you really get irritated and you say, why? What does this have to do with anything? And then I explain to you that most cyber insurance policies today require pre-notification before expenses are going to be covered, and they have approved preferred vendor panels that you have to use in order to have that covered by your policy. And so we're sitting here at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and I'm telling you, Stephen, I can't move forward until I know if your cyber insurance company is even going to work with me, if I'm even on their approved list. Oh, and that cybersecurity firm, that forensics firm, that incident response firm that you had this arrangement with, did you bother to see if they were approved vendors under your insurance policy? Because if not, those hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees they're going to be charging you aren't going to be covered. And at that point, it then all hits home that you did not go through the process of putting your team together in the right way. And the reason I say this is I face this, I get at least 5 calls a month on new cases where I have to go through this exact scenario. Because cyber insurance policies have requirements to either use the vendors that the cyber insurance company has already approved, which is a very small list and likely doesn't include even me on many of these policies or many of the vendors we work with, or they require you, if you have a vendor you want to use, to get pre-approval of them before you can use them. And so my point in saying this is you need to know if you have cyber insurance. You need to know what it provides for, coverage for, generally speaking, and you need to know what the requirements are for using vendors. If it has a select list of only vendors that company will work with, and they will not make exceptions. And there are a couple of carriers out there that do that. You need to know that, because you need to reach out now and start building a relationship with that forensics firm, with that security firm, with that vendor that does decryption negotiations, with that PR firm, with that law firm. You need to know now so you can build your relationship, so you can get them put on your team, so you can call them when you have a problem, because they're the only ones you're going to be able to use. If you have vendors you know you want to use, that you have a relationship with, then when you're getting that cyber insurance, you need to tell your broker, these are the people we've worked with for years. If we have a problem, this is who we want to be able to work with. Get us a policy that will allow for that. And they can do that. Or if you're midstream, you've already got your policy, your renewal isn't coming up for another 8 months, and you've got vendors that you know you want to work with, you need to reach out to your broker now and say, hey, we need to get these people approved under our policy. That way, at 4 o'clock on a Friday, when we call and need help, we're not sitting around fumbling our thumbs around trying to figure out about cyber insurance and who's approved, but we already know who our approved team is, and we're ready to get into action. That's what you need to do right now, because as crazy as it may seem, cyber insurance is costing companies days, weekends, because if it comes in on a Friday, you want people in working that night, so you have that whole weekend to try to gain some ground on this and get restored early next week. You don't want to wait till Monday to start having these conversations, pushing you off then until the end of the week before you get it resolved. So as crazy as it sounds, one of the most important aspects of an incident response is having the ability to pay for it, which is your cyber insurance, and then having the ability to get your team involved and moving immediately, which means you got to work with that cyber insurance to get that team ready to go. And I don't care how big of a player you are in the market, the cyber insurance companies aren't going to budge in a lot of cases if you haven't done your homework and prepared on this in advance.
That's really good. I appreciate that. Thank you. So as we're coming up here, I think we have 12 minutes left. I wanted to recap and then ask you to add to it. One of the key takeaways that I heard, and I think it's a really good one, especially related to ransomware, is ensuring that you've got a way to identify who the key players are that you need in an incident response outside of your system, because you may not be able to get access to it. Having we'll say a hard copy, a spreadsheet of your key contracts, your notifications, and a process for working with purchasing and legal for keeping that updated. Are there any other key takeaways that our members can use so that they're better prepared from a compliance standpoint in the case of an incident?
Yeah. So let's move out of the ransomware context for a minute and into a normal kind of good old-fashioned data breach, where your operations weren't impacted, but data was exfiltrated from your environment, made it into the hands of the threat actors. They've sold it on the dark web, and now bad things are happening. So you've got to go through and do a data breach notification. What these notification laws require is they require you notify the individuals whose data was impacted. And there's a privacy reason for that. It's because their privacy was breached by this, and you got to put them on notice so they can take steps to protect themselves, since it's data about them that's now being out there and misused. The second aspect is you have to notify the regulators in many of the states and foreign jurisdictions as well, of the incident or of the breach. So because they're investigating these now. The one that's been doing this the most here in the US is in the HIPAA context. It's for healthcare, and it's the US Department of Health and Human Services. The FTC has been pretty strong in its involvement. The SEC is getting stronger from a federal standpoint, but the state's attorneys generals are really picking up their interest in these kind of cases. And so you've got to, each state has different notification requirements, by the way. Some don't require notification to the AGs or, whatnot. So you got to know each state, right? But you send them that notification. You send them a sample of the breach notification letter in many cases, and then they follow up with you and open an investigation. And a lot of people think that the reason they're doing this is to be harsh or to be penalizing you because you've had this incident, this data breach. But that's not really the case. It's not so much to penalize you for that one event. It's more to see how diligent were you being before the event. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what they're all trying to do is they're trying to get you into compliance. They're trying to get you to comply with the obligations that are set out to protect your environments and to protect the data of people that's being entrusted over to you. And so these enforcement actions, these investigations, are the stick they're using to kind of knock you into compliance. And what they're looking for in these follow-up investigations is to see how seriously were you taking these obligations before the event happened. So do you have a strong history of performing risk assessment so that you can know what your risks are? Because let's be honest, none of us can protect against something we don't know exists. So if we're trying to protect against our risks, we got to know what they are, right? So we need to have shown that we've performed risk assessments, that we have understood where our data is, and be able to document all this, and then to show that we've done pen testing or whatever else it is we've done, and then to show that we have taken that seriously and put in a strategic action plan in place to address those risks. Not necessarily all at once, because no one's expected to do that in most cases, but that we're doing it in a reasonable manner to try to be reasonable in how we protect our environments and the data entrusted to us. So you need to be able to show all that and provide documented evidence of your compliance process. And all these compliance programs at the end of the day come down to one of two things: protecting your environment, and more importantly, protecting the data that's been entrusted to you, that's stored and handled within your environment. And so you work outward from there. And what you find, what I find, is even when companies have really egregious breaches, if they were showing a lot of effort and a lot of diligence in trying to fix it beforehand and in trying to protect against it, but they just got it wrong, then the regulators don't come down on them nearly as hard as they do, even in a simple case recently, like with HIPAA, where there was one unencrypted laptop that was stolen that had like 20 some odd thousand patient records on it, and they were fined for over $1 million because they knew it was a risk. They had been told it was a risk, and they didn't do anything about it. They showed disregard for it. And that's why the regulator came in and said, you know what, I got to use this big stick to get their attention, to make them do what they need to do. And so what we see here is, at the end of the day, compliance comes full circle back into the incident response to show, because when you're dealing with the regulators, you need to show the regulators your compliance efforts up until that point, and then show them that moving forward, these are the things we're going to do to try to be better. And when you can show them that and they see you're really serious about it, there's a lot less incentive for them to be terribly punitive than when you're not.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I appreciate that. So one quick question that I was going to ask you that came in, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap up. In the ransomware cases that have you seen the hackers going after the backups as well?
Oh. Was that the end of the question? Sorry.
That was it. Yeah, I'm going to take that as a yes, but yes, that was the end of the question.
Man, yeah. I mean, 4 or 5 years ago, not so much. But look, the hackers are trying to make money, and they know the best way to defeat a ransomware attack is for you to have viable backups to be able to roll those out, get them online, and get back up and running. If you can do that, you really don't have an incentive to pay them, at least up until recently when they've started exfilling data as well and using that for extortion. So what they did is they evolved their tactics like they always do, and they go in and find the backups first. And they either delete them or they corrupt them or do something else to make them unavailable. And then they launch the actual ransomware malware that encrypts the network. And we are seeing this happen at the MSP level frequently. So even MSPs that say, don't worry, we've got it covered. Oh, nobody's going to get what we've got. They're getting them. And so redundancy is the order of the day here. Have your routine backups that are done daily or hourly or weekly or what have you, but there's still no substitute for the old having a tape drive or USB storage, from a month or 2 months or sometimes even 6 months ago, stored away in a safe somewhere that's encrypted, of course, because you want that protected. But man, sometimes that's the only option we have in some of these cases.
So having a separate backup vault.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, this
That's
has been
not mapped.
Yeah.
That is not mapped to the network, because if it's mapped, they're going to get into it.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, Sean, and I can't thank you enough. It's just been great. So thank you.
Well, it is my pleasure, Stephen. Thank you as well. And look, if anybody has any questions or wants to talk about any of this any further, shoot me an email, give me a call, whatnot, and I'm always happy to talk more about these types of things.
And as we wrap up real quick, as I mentioned at the beginning, the Collaborative's commitment and mission is helping CISOs grow and defend the companies that they've been entrusted with. So our next webinar, the next installment, will be on September 10th. And this will be the Cybersecurity Collaborative's Leadership Profile Series. It's an exclusive opportunity to hear intimate dialogue with some of the nation's most accomplished and captivating cybersecurity leaders. And we have two just wonderful CISOs speaking. I work with both of them. We have Mark Varner, who is the CISO and corporate VP for Yum Brands, which is Taco Bell, KFC, Pizza Hut, and Wingstream. And Dave Eslick, who's the VP and CISO for Chipotle. Just world-class CISOs, and I encourage everyone to join that webinar. And with that, and Sean, again, with a big thanks, we're going to go ahead and drop the bridge. I appreciate everybody's participation.
Thank you all.
Take care, everybody.